Welcome to the Piping Show, coming to you from the National Piping Centre here in Glasgow. I'm your host this week, Finlay MacDonald, and I'm delighted to say I'll be chatting later on to Gary West. If you enjoy the content on the Piping Show, please remember to share and hit like on our YouTube channel for the National Piping Centre. It really does help us connect with more pipers around the world. I'm really looking forward to chatting with Gary West later in the show. But at the moment, I'd like to introduce Helen Urquhart, who's going to bring you this week's news in piping.
This week, the big event in piping is the Argyllshire Gathering, which takes place on Wednesday and Thursday. Many of the big Pibroch events will be on Wednesday, with the gold and silver medal, the senior Pibroch, as well as the former winners' MSR taking place. On Thursday, the light music will take place at Open Games. You can find out more at the Argyllshire Gathering website. We will look to report the results from all this event next week.
Hello everyone. As we're in the midst of preparing or competing at Oban and Inverness, our big solo competitions of the piping calendar, I thought it'd be good to take a look back at one of history's great competitors and one of the tools that he would have used to help him in his competitions, and that is John Mccall. For those who don't know, John Mccall lived from 1860 to 1943 and was one of history's greatest solo piping competitors. He was also a great composer, writing many of our sort of standard 2/4 marches that we all know and love today, tunes like Dougal McCall's Farewell to France, which he composed for his son's return from World War I, Jeannie Carruthers, or Mrs. John Mccall, which he composed for his wife, just to name a few. In addition to being a great solo competitor, John Mccall was also a great Highland athlete, Highland dancer, and fiddle player, and would go around the Highland Games circuit competing in all of the events and making quite a killing to supplement his income. Even though he was a great player, he was still a human and had the issue that I think we all have, where how many times have you been asked, do you know how this tune goes? And you think to yourself, can you sing the first 2 bars? Well, John Mccall figured out a great way to get around that by writing out an aid memoir. So this is a small book he would have carried in his pocket with the first 2 bars of tunes written out to help him remember how they started. There's 80 tunes in total in the book, and it features some absolute classics, things like The Highland Laddie, Green Hills of Tyrol, Abercairney Highlanders, and many other standard competition tunes. There's a few interesting things that we can learn from this book, being as old as it is. One is, if we look at the actual notation, it's written in a slightly archaic style, and the staff, or the beam of the note, is written on the opposite side of the note head from how we would write it today. Additionally, the style in which he writes the grip movement changes from early in the book to late in the book. Early in the book, he wrote it in the style where you would have 2 low G theme notes with a D grace note. Later on, it's written in the modern style of all the notes being written as grace notes. I think we could all benefit from having something like this in our pockets from time to time, and a great reminder that even the best among us are still human.
Of course, Chanter MacDuck has been on his travels again this week, so let's have a look and see what he's been up to and where he's been. I'm really looking forward to my chat with Gary West. Gary's known throughout the world as an amazing performer, a great researcher, broadcaster. So here's my interview with Gary West. So Gary, here we are. This is a wee bit weird doing it this way. I guess we're turning the tables in that you and I have certainly talked many times for the Pipeline programme where you've been interviewing me, but you're in the hot seat this time. And thanks for making yourself available for the Piping Show chat.
No problem. I'm not sure I like this. I like to ask the questions, as you know.
I can see you sweat a wee bit there. You're in the hot seat, but it's a pleasure.
Just keep an eye on me, because after a while I'll probably turn the tables again and start asking you stuff.
It's natural, No, it's great to have you here at the National Piping Centre, and we were doing a chat about Piping Live earlier on, but I thought it would be great just to talk, starting off about your kind of early career in piping, or how you got started. I know you're a Perthshire boy, and I know a lot of it, but it would be good if everyone, how did you get started off in your piping?
So, yeah, it was the local pipe band, the Vale of Athol. which at that time, so this would be, well, I was born in '66, so probably about 1970 or thereabouts, I discovered this wondrous thing called the pipe band, and my granddad used to take me down the main street in Pitlochry to hear the pipe band. They used to do this parade, the Highlandites, down the street every couple of, well, probably twice a week at that point in the summer season. And apparently, I don't really remember it, but apparently I was just like away with this, a demand to go and hear the pipe band. And at that time, the Vale of Atholl wasn't a competing band. It was a parade band, basically, and a kind of older age profile, really. And Ian Duncan, who was in the band, Ian would be in his late teens probably then, or early 20s. The old pipe major Alan Cameron retired, and Ian took over as pipe major and persuaded Alan to stay on to start a youth policy, basically, and become the tutor. And Alan was a great teacher, because there was quite a few of us started about the same time, went to Alan for lessons. And a lot of them are very good players, and he was obviously knew what he was doing, and there was this added incentive now that you could, once you got 2 or 3 years into the chanter and stuff, you could join the pipe band. And Ian had this obviously a vision of where he wanted to take this pipe band, and started. Ian was a maths teacher at the time. He went to Crieff High School and started a wee pocket of pupils there, and then he went to Dundee to take a piping teaching job, actually, at that point. So Ian, wherever he went, he had this wee trail of 3 or 4 young pipers behind him, really, and he brought them all together in the Vale, and that was it. We were off, really, and that was the bug. And I remember going to my very first competition, which was the World Championships in 1976 in Hawick, and we were in grade 4, first time we'd competed, and we got a 6th place, and I thought, this is brilliant. I was, I'd be 9 or 10. Following year we got nothing, and then 1978 we won all 5 majors in grade 4, and that was us off on the way, really. So it was just probably like a lot of folk seeing the parade band of a local pipe band, thinking that sounds and looks great. That was me. Yeah.
It's funny that totally resonates with me, because I grew up in Nielsen with my dad running the Nielsen band. It was exactly that. I remember actually my dad, he tried teaching me when I was about 8 or 9, and I didn't fancy it. But then it was maybe a year or 2 later at the Nielsen Cattle Show Day, and I remember it vividly, hearing and seeing the band. Yeah. I was like that all kind of made sense by that point, and it just that bug thing happened, but it was just like I was just mad for it after that. And you spoke about Ian there. I mean, he's been such a huge influence on piping in Scotland and throughout the world. But and obviously Gordon was there at that time. It must have been an amazing time for the Vale. It was amazing, and a lot of other great players as well. And Gordon was 2 years older than me. Went to the same school, Lochray High School, and Gordon actually started after me. So I was really young. I was 6, I think, when I went to chanter lessons first, going on 7. And it was probably a year after that. So Gordon would be probably quite late, and he was probably 10, I suspect, before he started getting lessons, so 9 or 10. But I remember he just, I was probably 2 years, I was really wee right enough, but 2 years on the practice chanter before I got anywhere near the pipes. I think Gordon was like 3 weeks or something, So it was obvious from a very young age, this guy's amazing. It's natural talent.
Yeah, and I remember going to a summer school at Stirling University. The old summer schools were great there, and there was a piping one. They did loads of stuff. They did dance and fiddle and history classes and so on. And it was myself and Gordon went, and I was probably like, 11, Gordon was maybe 13, and it was Ian McFadden and Hugh Mccall that were teaching. And I remember that's the first time I remember where the wider piping world, albeit quite small in this class, heard this genius that was Gordon Duncan, and he just blew them away, even just on the chat.
I remember the first time I heard them. Vividly. It was in I think it was the Barhead Folk Club
Yeah.
in the Brig Inn pub,
Aye.
and he was playing with the Tannies. My
Yes.
dad had taken me along, and I remember that as well. Like that
Yeah.
kind of,
Yeah.
like this is something different. This
Yeah.
is like this is a whole different ball game here.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's amazing. So, I mean, in that pipe band thing, I remember as well. What I used to love about listening to the Vales and music, you know, they
Yeah.
could have,
Yeah.
and of course Gordon was obviously a huge
Yeah.
part of that. It's like,
Yeah.
you always seem to come up with like really cool medleys and like really unique tunes and
Yeah, I mean it was stuff that was seen maybe as being a wee bit off the wall at the time. Although 5 or 6 years later it was sort of standard fare really. But the first thing I think Gordon started to do before he really got into the composing as such was adapting, especially from the Irish tradition. So taking it from a sort of octave and a half. Set of tunes, squeezing them into the 9 notes of the Highland pipes, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. But Gordon had the knack, he just knew how to make it sound natural. So we were listening to the big Irish bands at the time, Bothy Band, Plankstay, and Moving Hearts a wee bit later on. And Gordon, that was the stuff we played on the bus, through the tape machine on the bus, and then next week Gordon would have a version of it that we'd then try with the band, and it was a bit later, he was probably in his late teens before he started really composing stuff, or at least letting us hear what he'd composed. So that was the next phase, was playing tunes of Gordon, and Roddy McDonald, R.S. McDonald, who was a good pal of Gordon and, well, the whole band really, but and Ian. And so some of his stuff that was maybe slightly off the wall, good drying and stuff like that, the big parcel, and we've often chatted about this since. If we'd been a bit straighter, might we have been a wee bit more successful in terms of actual prizes? We won 2 majors, but I think third in the Worlds was a few times was the highest we got. But yeah, it's nice to hear people now say that they were inspired by the stuff we were doing then.
Oh, I'm sure. The whole piping community were. I guess that's quite a nice link then into the other part of your kind of musical career has been playing in the kind of folk scene and different bands, Kilbeg, for example. How did that develop alongside the same time as the Vale stuff?
Pretty well. So we were, as well as the Irish bands, we were listening to the big Scottish bands at the time that had pipes in them, especially so Ossian, Tannies, Battlefield, and then the non-pipe bands, the non-piped folk bands like Silly Wizard and so on. And we just lapped it all up. And so when I went to university in Edinburgh when I was 18. I started getting into the sessions there, and there was a cracking session. Monday nights were great because I started teaching at the Edinburgh University Piping Society, just like beginners or folk who played a bit, and there was 2 or 3 of us who were quite experienced players by then at the university, so we went along to do some teaching. So it was Monday night was the teaching, and then we went to a pub called the Green Tree, which was in the Cowgate. It's no longer there, it's knocked down. And it was just everybody went on a Monday night to this session, a huge big table. There was probably 30 people sitting around it. And it was just, wow, this is fantastic. And for the first few weeks I just listened. And then I got the big pipes out and had a tune, and everyone joined in. I suppose the big pipes were probably nearer B flat then than they are now. So everyone could just join in. And there was enough of them that they could compete with the Highland pipes. And then after that, I got into bellows pipes. So I was just hooked. And the Kilbeg guys were always there, Davy Steele, Peter Boone. And Gordon by then was playing with them. He was their piper. And then he left to go to the Tannahill Weavers, and that opened up a space, and because I knew the guys, they said, "Do you fancy a shot?" And I was just finishing at university then. A lot of great years with them, touring all over the place, and did 5 albums I think with them.
Yeah, I remember well. And I guess you've kind of touched on it, but there's also the kind of academic side of your career. You were at the School of Scottish Studies for quite a long time.
Well, when I went to university, I was meant to do English Lit actually, and I stood in the queue to sign up for the courses. And I didn't like the sound of the other people. You know, I felt I was the only Scottish one, first of all, but also they were all, I don't know, they weren't my folk, shall we say.
Right.
And then I saw this.
They weren't at the session on the Monday
They weren't
night.
at the session on the Monday night. Aye. And I saw this desk that said School of Scottish Studies, and my brother had actually, Neil, who you know and does some work here, he had done a 1-year course there before me, so he said, "Oh, go and check out the School of Scottish Studies. It's just like folk music and stuff." I said, "Really? You can study that?" So I went along, signed up for their courses, and there was no degree at that time. They were just doing like outside courses, you know. But they said, "Oh no, we're planning on a degree." So I did Scottish history. I did Gaelic. I'd done Gaelic up to higher at school. So I did a year of Gaelic at university, and this other course that at the time was called Oral Literature and Popular Tradition, and they said, well, the discipline is called ethnology, and we're starting this degree in Scottish ethnology, so I said, sign me up for that. So it was amazing, actually, the thought that I could study formally this stuff that I just loved listening to and doing. I mean, it wasn't all music, there was the whole wider cultural side of it, the sort of more historical side, anthropological side.
Did you study under Hamish Henderson?
I did, aye. So Hamish was still there. Hamish was an amazing guy too. He of course, now looking back, I know how amazing he was. He was one of the great cultural figures of Scotland in the 20th century, but he was just an old guy when I went along. But he and shambolic in terms of his lecturing. You know, he would say one day, "What was I talking about yesterday?" And he was really posh. You know, I couldn't understand how this posh-voiced guy was doing this folklore stuff. And we'd say, "Oh, you were talking about such and such." And he went, "Oh yeah." So he would start there, but then he would go off on a tangent somewhere else, and he would talk about his war years, or he was in Germany before the war, getting vulnerable people out. Almost Secret Service stuff, and then talking about when he was in the intelligence corps, when he was interviewing or interviewing probably wasn't the technical word, but prisoners of war, whether Italian or German, and he was fluent in both languages. And he said, "Yeah, I would just kind of ask them to sing me a song, you know, and I would sing them a song, and then when they got on great, and then he would get their secrets out of them, you know." He's apparently really good with that side of things. But looking back now, amazing to have these people and lots of others as well. Alan Bruford, Margaret Bennett, Margaret Mackay, just big names, John McInnes in the folklore world that were my lecturers. And
you ended up as a professor?
I did, so I had this choice really after I graduated. So I played with Kilbeg, and we were getting good gigs and good festivals and good tours, but we were never quite full time. Two of the guys in the band had jobs, real jobs. So we were always, it was a kind of summer holidays kind of although we were on the road a lot. I found some diaries recently from that period, which would be the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And we were away all the time, really. So I remember making this decision thinking that I had to make a decision between music and the academic side. And to begin with, I thought I would go down the music route, and I left the university in '88, and then also decided I was skint for a while. That's when I decided making music a career was quite hard work, you know, and precarious. And so I was a banker for a year. I was a really, really rubbish banker. I think I lost the Bank of Scotland quite a lot of money, actually. But then I went back to do a PhD, and that's the point where I thought, actually, maybe I should. Maybe if I go down the academic route, I can have a steady job and still do the music, whereas it's harder the other way around. Yeah. And to be honest, at the time, the opportunities were far fewer than they are now. Although saying that, if you were a half decent band at all at the time, there wasn't a lot of competition. So you got the good gigs, you got the good festivals, and you know, it was with Clanalba, not Kilbeg, but that was the Dick Gaughan, Brian McNeill. Just looking at the schedule, Glastonbury. Oh, brilliant! Okay, go and play at Glastonbury, and you know, and it's
was that early 90s kind of thing?
Early 90s, yeah. So I mean, it wasn't anything as big as it is now, and we were on the postage stamp stage or whatever they call it. They didn't call it that, but it wasn't one of the biggest. But just being there and sampling the atmosphere and stuff.
Yeah,
so whereas now I look at all the guys coming out of here and elsewhere, and you think there's so many great players around and great bands that it must be harder to get your foot in the door.
I guess there's more festivals as well, isn't there?
Well, I suppose there are. Yeah.
And I think if you then look to the pipeline thing, I guess we started off talking about where this would normally be your gig asking the questions. how did that come about?
I quite like it this way round, by the way.
You enjoyed it?
I quite like it.
And I
don't have to think of the next question.
We were chatting earlier about it, and I think something like Pipeline for me really highlights the real kind of like public service of the BBC and in the last 100 years. I grew up listening to nothing but Pipeline. It was just like it used to be a Tuesday night, I think, or a Thursday, and my dad would have it on, and it's always been there. And it's now under your control, I guess, and you're taking the reins on it. How do you go about putting a show together? And
it's a lot of fun. So I was just working out. Last month was my 20th year actually of presenting Pipeline, but I've only a few months where I've been producing it as well. So Ian McInnes, who many people will know, was Mr. Pipeline for, I suppose, over 30 years between producing it for other presenters or presenting it or doing both. So Ian retired a couple of years ago, and so I took on just basically making the programme, which is wonderful because you have total freedom really. But you know that it'll be the same, I'm sure, here and putting Piping Live on and so on. People know what they like and people know what they don't like, and they're not shy in telling you. So you've got the kind of solo Highland pipe traditional end of things. Well, I'm sure it's exactly the same for you putting a programme together of a festival. I'm putting a programme together in an hour's package, as it were. And probably when I started doing it 20 years ago, if I look back at playlists now, I suspect it would be 80%, or maybe say, 70% solo Highland piping, 20% pipe bands, 10% something else. And gradually that balance has shifted, and I think that's simply a reflection of what's happening in the scene. So my view is we have to be representative of what's actually happening out there, whether live music or whether it's the music that people are actually recording and releasing. And there's very, very little of that in terms of solo Highland piping. People really aren't making CDs now. So we have to get them in and record them, which is great. But the people who are release and pipe bands are making very few recordings now. Maybe Simon Fraser University are great. They always put out CDs. For most other bands, it's if they do one of the big concerts, either Celtic Connections or the Pre-Worlds concert, then hopefully they'll be able to record it, and that's some. Other than that, it's us recording them at the Worlds, say. Very difficult and expensive recording a full pipe band now. You probably remember, as I do, going into the old Queen Margaret Drive studios with one microphone in the middle of the room, half a dozen pipers, a couple of drummers or whatever, and my very first broadcast with the Vale was like that. Whereas now, there's no studio in the world, in the land will get a full pipe band inside it. And so, but the people who are making the recordings are let's call them the folky people. And so it's getting that balance, and I try and make sure that there's a pibroch, for example, in maybe not every programme, but in most programmes, because no one else will play that. You won't, well, certainly not on the BBC. I mean, obviously there's the specialist piping online programmes and so on, but I think it's really important that side of it, and not just paying lip service to it, but just actually giving a full pibroch, not a wee snippet of fading it out after 5 minutes or whatever. So yeah, it's great fun. I really enjoy it. It's a nice challenge, and it's nice trying to get a theme. And the BBC, so if I always assume that no one at the BBC listened to what we were doing, and so long as no news is good news. But actually, the senior producers listen to every programme and give us feedback. Yeah. And they're very good at saying things like, okay, I didn't know what you were talking about at that point. I think you were really talking to other pipers at that point. Remember, this is a general audience, and that's good to be reminded of that, because the online piping programmes and so on, you have to seek it out, and you're probably a committed piping enthusiast to seek that out. But with the BBC, because it's actually going into your car or into your kitchen or whatever, whether you like it or not,
it's there. Yeah.
It's there. Yeah. And so there's lots of either accidental listeners or committed listeners who are not piping experts. Yeah. And that's the thing I find hardest, is where to pitch something. So you can't explain every week what a pibroch is. You can't say, okay, this is theme and variation, but every few weeks you have to just remind them and say, well, so if you're new to this is what's happening here, you know. But if you do it too often, then you lose your specialist audience, and you'll be the same, I'm sure, with anyone who comes to your festival or through your door here in the Piping Centre for any other reason. They're going to want different things. They're going to be at different levels and have different areas of expertise or no expertise at all. And that's the trickiest thing.
It's a great show, and
good. Thank you.
I enjoy listening to it. And we're probably going to have to wrap up about now, but it's been a real pleasure.
I'm only getting started,
and I'm glad to see that our taste in shirts has been
absolutely. And this is not the first time we've appeared dressed the same, is it?
It's not. There's something going on there. But it's been a pleasure to listen to you speak, and I could listen to you speak all day, and we could tell stories all day. But thanks very much, Gary West.
Pleasure. Thank you, Finlay. Cheers.
Okay, thanks for tuning in to the Piping Show. I've been Finlay MacDonald, and I'd like to say a huge thank you to Gary West for coming in and chatting today. And we're going to finish up with Tune of the Week, which is actually a tune of Gary's called Katrina's Welcome.
It is indeed. Thanks for the loan of the pipes. I didn't bring any.
And we are the National Piping Centre.
That's very true, yes, very true. Katrina's Welcome.